Welcome to Inspired. I'm Alexa Von Tobel. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to see a woolly mammoth roaming the tundra? The idea of bringing back extinct species sounds like pure fantasy, the stuff of movies like Jurassic Park. But what if I told you that not only is it possible, it's actually happening right now? Just think about that for a moment. Creatures that disappeared from our planet thousands of years ago, animals our ancestors might have seen, could once again be part of our world. And today, I'm thrilled to be sitting down with the visionary entrepreneur who's turning this science fiction into reality. Ben Lamm is the co-founder and CEO of Colossal Biosciences, the company working to bring extinct species back to life. From the woolly mammoth to the dodo to their latest achievement, the successful de-extinction of the direwolf after 10,000 years of absence from our planet. But the journey to de-extinction isn't Ben's first venture. He's a serial entrepreneur who's built and sold 5 companies across AI, gaming, and edtech. From Hypergiant's work on critical defense infrastructure to Chaotic Moon's creative technology revolution, eventually acquired by Accenture, Ben has consistently pushed beyond conventional thinking. I'm fascinated by minds like Ben's that operate at the critical edge of what's possible. What makes someone look at the extinct species and think, we can fix that? How do you build a company culture where the impossible becomes just another Tuesday? And perhaps the most intriguing, what happens when we unleash unbridled ambition to tackle the thorniest problems on our planet? Today's conversation will take us on the journey through Ben's entrepreneurial mindset, how he cultivates gravity-defying ambitions, assembles teams of brilliant outliers, and manages the high-stakes emotional roller coaster of pioneering new territory. If you're running a startup, we know things like managing equity and communicating with investors are always top of mind. Carta has built a connected suite of tools that over 40,000 companies use to do just that. Their platform of software and services helps you lay the groundwork so you can focus on building. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com. And with that, let's welcome Ben. Ben, first of all, I'm so excited to have you on here. And I have to confess that as I was walking in here to get set up for today, many people here at Inspired stopped me and were like, he is so cool. Like the woolly mammoth, what is he doing? This is incredible. So I'm jazzed to have this conversation. So first, just welcome. I want to start from the beginning, Ben. You grew up in Texas. You, if I have it right, were born 44 years ago in Texas.
I'm 43, so I still have a little bit more time before I get to 44, and I'm epigenetically 35. So yes, I was technically born 44 years ago, based on rotations around the sun, but I've been on a big health kick, and so I want to say that I'm probably closer to 35, 36.
I'm going to go with that from now on, by the way. I'm going to start sharing my function
Yeah,
health.
you gotta do like the function health test and be like,
Okay, wait.
well,
So
technically.
then I'm not going to take the time to pull it up. So I'm 23.9, which has to be a mistake.
That's incredible.
I think it has to be a mistake. And so I feel like I should get more data. But if we're starting there, first of all, congrats to both of us for being healthy. I love that, Ben. Ben, let's go back to your childhood. So you were raised throughout Texas, Fort Smith, Arkansas. You were just such a prolific entrepreneur doing some really ambitious things. And I just want to go back to your childhood and ask the question of what stands out to you? If you think about your childhood and things that you think help weave you into this,
Yeah, I would say I had a weird but like a non-traditional childhood. So I was raised by my parents got divorced at a very young age, and my dad lived predominantly overseas, and so at an early age, I actually traveled a lot with my father internationally. So I got a lot of interesting exposure to kind of international cultures. I think that kind of gave me kind of a global kind of viewpoint and kind of realizing that there's lots of different ideas out there. There's lots of different cultures out there. Lots of people live very, very different all over the world. So I kind of got that flavor. But then I was, predominantly, most of my time was raised by my grandparents, my mom, and so mostly a single mom, right? So I spent a little bit of time with my father, but for the most part, I spent a lot of time with my mom in Texas, right? And she was a Spanish teacher, and my grandparents were just kind of like your normal kind of middle American, grandparents, right? They were super involved. So I had a lot of love and support, which is great. Even though she was a Spanish teacher, I still don't speak Spanish. So I don't know what that says about me. Probably a lot, and it probably says nothing and a lot at the same time. But we moved around a little bit, but mostly in Texas. We did have, to your point, we had a small stint in Arkansas, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, with because my mom got remarried and she was teaching Spanish there, and then that didn't totally work out, so we ended up coming back here to Texas, and then I went to high school in Texas, went to college in Texas, started my first companies in Texas, moved to San Francisco, moved back, moved to New York, moved back, and so I think that Texas is pretty deep in my roots.
When you think about something that you can credit some of your grit and resilience to from your childhood, is there something that just stands out, or a formative story, or anything that you would want to share?
So two things in high school, like going into high school, my family, I think, did a really good job at the early stages, just instilling work ethic. So I always like mowed lawns. I always did kind of little chores, ins and outs to try to make money. I also once got caught for outsourcing mowing like up my own lawn to my neighbor because I was getting paid an allowance. I just split it with him, and then I just played video games and let him do that. So I kind of found like you could kind of arbitrage your time and do what you want if you just if you can bring in enough cash to then pay someone to do the actual work. So I kind of learned that. But then in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kind of just got fired from everything I tried. I was like, I think I want to go learn about cars. And so I like went and like applied with one of my buddies to be to work at like a Jiffy Lube. And I lasted like, I was like, because yeah, it's important to know like mechanics. I'm in Texas. It was the 90s. It's a very manly thing. Like you should know about cars. And
Yeah.
so which I know nothing about cars. I don't even like cars now. But I did. So I like lasted a day and like I got fired. And then I was like, I love animals, so I'll go work at a pet store. I think I lasted a week at the pet store. And then I love movies, so I thought I'd work at a movie theater. And I was like, oh, you can watch movies, right? And so I showed up, and they're like, well, you're not wearing the outfit that our uniform, I think they called it. I think it's an outfit. And I was like, well, that outfit is ridiculous. I'm not going to wear that, but I'll work really hard. And they're like, if you don't wear the uniform, you can't work here. And so that was my shortest job because like they had like ridiculous, like they had the most ridiculous outfit. And I was like, I'm not going to wear that, but I'll work. I'll work extra hours, but I just am not going to wear that because that's just stupid.
I like to think you were a nonconformist early, Ben. You were
Yeah.
nonconformist early.
And so like I think my family was like, well, he's gonna live with us forever, and this is this whole work thing because I had a desire to work, but I questioned the system quite a bit, right? And then like I thought things like pennies and change was stupid, so like I worked at a restaurant and I worked at Sonic, and I would just round up on the money or round down because it's like it's silly to like spend extra time calculating the exact dollars and cents. Nobody really cares about that. But apparently some people do. And so I just went through this like plethora of jobs that like I wasn't qualified for. And then, but then I had this incredible teacher who I took a class in college called, like everyone took like woodworking and stuff. I took a class in high school called Web Mastery. And this was the time to date myself, to date my non-epigenetic self. But it was that I actually learned and taught myself Macromedia Flash. And this was the time of the internet where like everything was moving and it like, or everything was about to move, and it was like gave everyone like motion sickness, and you needed that plug-in before like Steve Jobs killed Flash for a while. And so I thought it was really interesting. And so I taught myself Macromedia Flash before it ended up becoming Adobe, and then or being acquired by Adobe, and action scripting. So I loved HTML and XML, and so I just started building web pages because I could do it from a laptop, and then I could still go have fun with my friends or do whatever. And so I started just teaching myself kind of basic web coding. And I got really, really into it because it was kind of the right mixture of kind of like science and art, where I could design stuff that was cool, and then I could also like make it animated, and I could actually code it so it could do a lot of really. And this was kind of the time of the internet where you went from like gifts to Flash to online payments. So it was a really kind of cool time to do this. I mean, we're still working mostly on dial-up, but it was a pretty cool time.
I love that. I'm like really giggling that you've been fired from so many jobs. And
But
actually,
those were all very early.
yeah, that was all very early, but it really charted you towards the fact that you were like, I'm unemployable and I should just
Yeah,
build
yeah,
my
I'm
own
definitely.
thing.
I am the most unemployable. I still think I'm unemployable.
But if it makes you feel better, my husband jokes that I'm also unemployable, and because I always have to build things. So maybe there's the same there. I want to just before we get into Colossal, which I'm just epically dying to talk about. It would be like silly for me not to mention the fact that you've literally built 5 other companies, and just I'm going to name some of them, including, and I'm sure, sorry, many others, but 5 very big ones. Hypergiant, which was acquired by Tribe Capital; Conversible, which is acquired by Like Person; Chaotic Moon, which is acquired by Accenture.
Oh,
Um,
I also got fired by Accenture, just to be clear. I did get fired there too. So just
I,
I want to be honest and transparent.
I already love you, Ben. So when we think about just the fact that like one day the light bulb went off and you're like, I'm an entrepreneur. And by the way, just an incredibly successful one, building many businesses that have had many successful exits. When did you know you were an entrepreneur and that you were meant to build things?
Well, I tried to do both at the end of college. So I studied finance and accounting in college, and I was 3 hours short of having a triple major with international business. And I did fine in college, but I was also really social. And but there was this interesting kind of inverse relationship towards my senior year of grades to balance sheet. So I was doing consulting. I was using those same tools, right, that I like kind of started to develop in high school, um, and started applying them to e-learning, right? Because it's like that's something people would pay for, and that's what large corporations were looking for. And I had this thesis that you could change e-reading to true e-learning versus like e-reading, which is what it was. It was kind of just like black text on a white screen, right? And so I thought you could create like an emotional connection to the content. And so I got it in a weird series of events. My first real job that I did not get fired from was Genentech, which was a biotech, but I got hired to build their online training stuff, right? And so it's kind of weird that my newest job is biotech, and my first job was biotech, even though I was doing something very very specific for them. And I was just, and so like I left Genentech as I kind of negotiated a deal with my intern boss. They wanted to pay me so much money for 3 months of work, and I said, well, how much has someone ever done in this role? Like when you hire them, and they're like, oh, they got like half of an online course done. And I was like, I'll do 3, but as soon as I'm done, you guys have to keep paying me, and I'll just like if I get done in a week, then you have to pay me the rest of the summer. That's our deal. And they're like, this guy's an idiot. Sure. So I did it, and I just grinded in. I was in South City, San Francisco, and also in Vacaville, and I was just in Davis, California, and I was just grinding for the first month, and then I took the next 2 months off because I got everything done, and they were so happy with it that I left the internship, and I left California in August of that year, going back into my senior year of college with for me at the time, a very large mid 6-figure contract. And I was like, oh, I have to start a business because they wanted me to do this for them versus the San Francisco software companies. And they wanted me to help engineer a learning management system. And so I was like, I have ideas on that. So I basically went back to college and stopped going to class and was really just kind of focusing on engineering. And so I think that was the moment that I truly knew. I think before that, I was just kind of having fun.
I love it. I mean, also, you like, first of all, you were like, can I have 2 months off? I'll just grind really hard. And somehow you were so good at it that they were like, we'll pre-fund your startup for us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. Um, when you think about the repeat learnings that you've had, and you built businesses in so many different sectors, what do you think you What do you think makes an entrepreneur exceptional? Like now that you have been an exceptional entrepreneur, what's your take on that, Ben?
I wouldn't say I'm an exceptional entrepreneur, but I think that it's I think I have a series of I have the right series of character flaws that come together that make like I'm very detail oriented. I'm not afraid to delegate, but I'm also not afraid to learn. So I'm very curious. So I like want to dive into new things. I have a really big desire for both learning new things and working with much smarter people. And I've never felt I've also you always hear hire smarter people, but I've always felt like a lot of times some people could be intimidated by that. But one of the things I'm really good at is telling people what I don't know. Like I was on a call earlier today and someone said some word and I was like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what that word means. and so I like to learn things and I like to surround myself with smarter people. And I think that combination and then, I do think that insatiable curiosity and I think I know how, now people love to talk about first principles and dissecting things, but I've always just found that I'm very curious and I feel like I'm really good at asking questions, right? And so I don't know, like before we started Colossal, I didn't know how we could go about building this business, but I felt like I could ask enough questions and probably enough of the right questions that we could figure it out if I had people that could answer those questions. So I've always just kind of taken that approach to everything that I've worked on.
I mean, you've literally worked in mobile apps, gaming, AI, conversational intelligence, and now biotechnology.
Yeah, and
You
satellites,
have,
yeah, it's been
yeah,
weird.
in satellites, like you truly have touched more industries than most people.
But the thing about them though, right, is that all of them are, I would say, like all of them are still somewhat of a systems design that required technology enablement, right? And so, like you had like software is a small contained, system. A software system that has a backend that talks to space is just a different type of system. For us to be successful at de-extinction, or even advanced species preservation and biobanking, you have to have the entire system, right? And so I think looking at like being able to take a step back and look at the forest for the trees so that you understand what you need, even if I don't understand exactly how to do this, right? Like people will be like, well, how do you deliver large cargo into safe harbor sites? And I was like, I don't know. Like that, I don't know how to do that. Like that's not my job, right? But I know that's one of the things that's really important. So we went and found the people to do that, right?
It almost sounds, Ben, like you are exceptional at knowing the hard questions to ask.
Yeah, I love to ask, but I also I actually like the research. And so, like George Church, the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me was George Church said, "I'm the best student he's never had," and I don't mind. That's the one brag I will ever do about myself because it was so kind because he did like he's like you really because and it's all because of the questions I asked because he'll say something, I'll ask him, I didn't understand what it meant. I'll write it down, and then I may have to ask it 3 or 4 times to understand it. But like, I really want to learn. Like, I don't think I'll ever be a PhD level, Nobel laureate biologist. But I think that I want to be thoughtful enough that I can ask questions, but also kind of like naive enough that I can ask questions that go against like, oh, well, we've always done it exactly this way. So I think I've just through dumb luck found the balance of like being able to ask the right questions, but also being naive and knowing enough about the topic to ask the right questions, but being naive enough about the topic that I can ask questions that they're like, well, yeah, we didn't think of it that way.
You're a little fearless at diving into your curiosity and smart enough to know uh, where you need to put people to get things done. I want to transition to Colossal just because I'm truly deeply interested and curious about what you are up to. And I just, for everybody listening, in 2021, you co-founded Colossal Biosciences with the renowned Harvard geneticist you just mentioned, Dr. George Church. Um, I mean, Ben, even for you as somebody who's touched all these crazy industries, like diving into de-extinction is just candidly wild. Like it's wild. I like can't wait to tell my children that I spent the day with you. Um,
because it's wild. Um, were you not a little nervous being like, now I'm going to go and like de-extinct animals and being like, okay, I'm over my skis, even for you, Ben?
I thought so a couple things. One is on the naive side. I think I was naive about parts of it, right? I was like, oh, all you got to do is like George convinced me very early that all the technologies fundamentally exist in some form or fashion, right? So there's opportunities for invention, but it's really also just a lot of innovation, right? Like the iPhone, right? Like the iPhone is an incredible innovation, not really an invention. Like we had kind of 99% of the parts, right? And so my view was George got me very comfortable, and I'm a trust but verify guy. So even though I had meetings with George, I went and talked to a bunch of other external scientists, spent some of my own money, like hiring some consultants and kind of thinking through this whole problem. And I got to the point where it's like, yes, we have all the tools and technologies. Now, the naive part, what came in was I thought that there's so much more than the lab work here, right? And so if we only had to raise capital, do it in a lab, and then be like, here's a dire wolf, here's a woolly mammoth, here's a thylacine, and that's kind of what I thought, the naiveness, then I think that's hard. But what most people don't realize is for as much as the insane science that there is that we have to build in the system that I'm sure we'll talk about that we've been very successful at building, there's just as much policy work, working with indigenous people groups, working with like answering hard ethical questions.
Yep.
How does it apply to conservation? We're very split with the conservation crowd. Like half the conservation crowd is like, we are doomed, and what we're doing in conserving land, which is something I still believe we should do, only gets us so far because we have human advancement, right on the heels of it, right? And we're losing species at such a crazy rate that we need alternatives. Sometimes people embrace those alternatives, but change is new and scary. And sometimes people are like, we know what we're doing isn't going to work long term, but this seems like you're distracting what we should be doing. And so there's a lot more nuanced to the business, and then eventually even the economic models outside of just like, if the business was just raise money, make these animals, build technologies that you can monetize, that is kind of, I think, where we thought. And I have no problem admitting that there's so much more to the company that that really had to be developed, and that we learned, right? And one of the things I think we did really good at is like you've got two types of critics, right? You've got just the absolute asshole critics, right? That are like, those are your couch X blue sky folks that are like, we hate you because it's Tuesday. And then you've got like the other people that are like, we don't like what you're doing because of this. And you're like, oh shit, that's a really good point. And so we have found in our one of the things I think the number one thing we did right with Colossal is we were able to bifurcate that audience, and then the people that we designated as informed critics that were like, oh, you're at the top of your field in like mammoth research. What do you mean we're using the wrong genomes, right? So calling that person, it was that's just a good
I
business.
totally get it. Yeah, you're like, that's actually just helpful. You're like,
Yeah, but
you're like, I want
what's
to work
crazy
here.
is that category of critics has actually like leaned into us, and I think it's because we went to them and we're like, wait, what do you mean? What can we do, right? And then we would implement what they'd say, and then we go back to them and be like, what else you got? And then they'd be like, this is confusing me. Like we said terrible things about you. Why are you talking to us?
But by the way, I always call it LITTP, lean into the pain, lean into the critics,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
really, really LITTP. Ben,
Yeah.
just in plain crazy English, what the hell is de-extinction? Like, what are you doing
Yeah.
for all
So
of us who are not geneticists?
yeah, so it's not possible like sometimes it turns into a philosophical debate, but it's funny because at the beginning of the company, I have to tell you this one quick story. At the beginning of the company, we did all this like, we're gonna announce the company, we're gonna and for some reason at the time we were like, whatever we do, do not mention Jurassic Park. That's going to scare people. Do not mention Jurassic Park. And so we spent did media training and all this
Were you
shit.
like, Jurassic Park? Ooh, I wasn't supposed to say that.
No, George did. So on the second interview, George is like, well, it's very much like Jurassic Park, only fluffier. And everyone was like, it was like you could hear a pin drop. And then the journalist was like, oh, I totally get it. So it's like what Mr. DNA talked about. And George's like, yes. And then it's funny, we kind of prepped for 3 months to never say Jurassic Park and how to avoid getting away from Jurassic Park. But in a weird way, it is just kind of like Jurassic Park, except not with dinosaurs, right? And so what you do is you have to take as a de-extinction and species preservation company, you have to find a bunch of ancient DNA, which there's work in that. You have to assemble the ancient DNA, which there's work in that. You have to compare it to the closest living relatives, and then once you identify these edits, you then start editing it in those closest living relative cells, right? So, like Jurassic Park, that's trying to fill all the gaps. We do all the computational analysis, and then we just make edits to the closest living relative for the lost genes or lineage. And then there's a couple different ways that you can use somatic cell nuclear transfer or editing and microinjections in an embryo. You can do a couple different things in order to get to the point that you then have something you can put into a surrogate. And then hopefully long term, we're working on, we have a 17-person team working on artificial wombs. So hopefully long term we do artificial wombs. But the naiveness comes into play even in that system, because I just thought, well, we'll just compare we can solve all these problems, but we'll just go compare it to the GCP of species. And then I was like, wait, what do you mean? Because I've seen 23andMe and all this stuff. I was like, what do you mean there's not a cloud access to all DNA of all life? We have not sequenced everything on why? That's also an insane proposition to me, that we're losing these species. We should protect them, but why haven't we sequenced everything and biobanked it? And people are like, we don't know. And the answer is just kind of no one's really wanting to put money into it.
That's so first of all, that is fascinating. And you're like, we clearly should be doing that. Okay, Ben, I want to go down to nuts and bolts of first of all, what was the first animal that you guys de-extincted? Was it the direwolf?
It was direwolf. So the first animal, the first extinct species back is the direwolf. We did produce a woolly mouse before that, but that was not
Chippendale. That's Chippendale.
Chippendale, right? Yeah, Chippendale.
Okay, well, so let's start with the direwolf. We're going to come back to the woolly mouse. Okay, so in plain English, how did you guys do that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of direwolf skulls in La Brea tar pit. There's this incredible wall and it's sick. But the problem is there's heat and acidification in those tar pits. So you have to find ancient DNA. So about 6 years ago, there was a group that Shapiro, my chief science officer, was a part of because they were excited about Game of Thrones, that actually got a very little bit of DNA from a single tooth. So you got all these crazy, beautiful skulls, but only one tooth from this one cave ever produced any viable DNA. So we went back and got that tooth. We also discovered another skull that had been found in a riverbed, so it was not found in La Brea tar pits, and we actually took out what's called the petrous bone, which is a bone in the inner ear, in the back of the skull, kind of inner ear area, that's very, very hard. It doesn't change a lot in development, so it's a great DNA storage vessel. We drill into it, so kind of like what you see in Jurassic Park with Amber. You extract that DNA, you run it through these sequencing machines, and it gives you those letters, right? Like what Mr. DNA tells you. It gives you this twisting, it tells you the letters or the DNA code of that animal. But the problem is ancient DNA is very fragmented, it's very old, it's very degraded. So you got to do lots of sampling, and it's destructive sampling, so you got to be careful with these old specimens. And then you've got to ensure that you get enough passes of the DNA, that you have enough that you can then piece together it, so that you know enough about the animal that then you can start looking at what its closest living relative is, and then you have to do the exact same thing with the closest living relative, and then you start to compare it all. So once you start to compare it all, you start to see what genes are consistent. So a dire wolf is 99.5% a gray wolf. Most people didn't realize, so some of the negative feedback we got because people didn't do the math was that we have two dire wolf samples, one that's 73,000 years old and one that's 13,000 years old. And there's more genetic diversity and drift in my two direwolf samples than there is from my second direwolf sample and today with wolves.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah. So if you can get multiple samples, that's really what you want. That isn't possible in all species. Like in the mammoth, we have over 70 samples now. And so that allows us over 60,000 years of our two direwolf samples to understand what really made a direwolf. What were the exact genes and what were fixed when we compare it to wolves and other canids, because there's a lot of variance between those. Like if you go back in humans from us to 60,000 years ago, there's a lot of changes, right? But what are those core things that really kind of kept the human lineage alive? And so once you identify those things, you use a suite of different tools to actually go in and edit the existing donor DNA. In this case, it's the gray wolf because it is the closest genetic relative to the dire wolf. You make those edits. Then we use a process called somatic cell nuclear transfer, which is basically Dolly the sheep cloning, where you take the nucleus that's been out of this edited cell, put it in the nucleus of an egg cell, and then we put it actually in a large domestic dog, because dogs are basically wolves, right? And so a pug is basically a wolf, and which is weird. And then 60 days later, we gave birth to our first little puppies.
That's just wild. And you got
It's
three of
magic.
them,
Yeah,
right?
so we have three. We have so we have Romulus and Remus, and then we used another cell line and created our first female, Khaleesi.
Khaleesi, by the way, the names are incredible. Okay, so just again, like mind blown. So basically, you have to get the samples. How much of the samples do you have to get, like to be able to have enough of the genetic sequencing?
Great question. It's
And also,
not
where the heck do you get those samples? Like, is it just things you dig up? Are there some parts at museums? Like, because my next question is going to be like, how many animals can you make? You could get enough samples and still not get enough genetic code. So, like, how
Yeah,
much
it's a
genetic
great
code do you
question,
need?
right? So it is a little bit of luck of the draw of what you get, but we get samples kind of from three primary ways. Number one, it's like there's great researchers that have already done the samples, right? So we have people like Luva Dahlin at University of Stockholm, who's the number one mammoth researcher in the world. One of our negative critics when we launched the business. Now one of our most active advisors, which I'm very proud
Thank
of.
you, friend.
And
Yeah, thank you, new friend.
my super new friend, and so he actually has been going on expeditions getting mammoth samples, and for his academic research, sampling them, right? So there are existing samples that ancient DNA experts have done, right? And so that's category one. Category two is museum samples, right? Sometimes museums will have samples, and we'll go do that. We did that with our thylacine work with the museum of the Melbourne Museum, where we actually took samples from preserved thylacine pups in that were preserved in ethanol. And then the third is like straight out of like a movie. It's expeditions, right? And I'm a member of the Explorers Club, where you literally like go out and like look for samples. I can't say what species yet because it would give away the animal, but we've been in caves. Like what's funny is like we're doing this direwolf launch and that's been insane. But at the same time, we're like going to different places and doing caving and like extracting samples of this and finding samples, extracting samples of this other animal. And so some of it is like expedition led. So it's like catacombs of like museums to like computers that's already been done to like out in the like Arctic or in a cave.
I mean, Ben, do you even like, especially since you're only genetically like 35 years old, do you pinch yourself and you're like, literally, what am I doing with my life? Like, I mean, it is, it is genuinely mind blowing that you are bringing back extinct animals. You're de-extincting them, which someone did ask me. They're like, "Is that a word?" And I was like, "I think Ben made it a word." De-extincting.
I think we added like the ed and the ing, but like Jurassic Park, like, they're extinct. Yeah, de-extinction is kind of a thing, I guess. So.
Yeah, there you go.
If you run a startup or you're doing things like managing investors, issuing equity, or getting valuations, then we suggest taking a look at Carta. Carta has built an entire connected suite of tools that's designed to help you manage equity, stay compliant with the IRS, and provide unprecedented transparency to your investors. Whether you're hashing out early ownership with your co-founders or getting ready to exit, Carta speaks startup. There's a reason they're the industry standard for cap tables, 409As, and stock comp expense accounting. So, if you're not managing equity on Carta already, we recommend you check them out. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com.
So when these three direwolves, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, like what happens next? I know that you like let them grow. I think they were safely being like letting them, actually get big. What happens now?
We have them on a secure, expansive ecological preserve that's certified by American Humane Society. So going back to like the earlier parts of the conversation, it's like, oh yeah, we need land for these animals. Oh yeah, we need secure facilities for these animals. Oh, we should probably work with like top animal care people, right? So there are a lot of these things. We right before we launched the business, I was our chief animal officer Matt James had not joined the company, and I called George because I got an introduction to this guy, and they're like, no, he's your guy. He is literally the guy you should have. And I called George Church. I was like, do you think we should hire someone that's like taken care of an elephant before? and and like going back to the naiveness, right, at the early stages, right? And so it's like, oh yeah, we should hire someone that's actually like birthed elephants, taken care of them, understand herd dynamics and socialization of elephants, right? So these are all these things that we've learned along the way, right? But those the two boys are on the preserve. Khaleesi is about to get integrated into that pack. We will be engineering probably on the low side 3, on the high side 5, just get the right pack like size. But they live an incredible life, right? There's 10 full-time care professionals there. They also have and we've like taken them from like bottle feeding to feedings, and now they're doing carcass feeding, and then probably some predation and some hunting. But it will probably be all some level of managed care for a long time. It's not available to the public or anything. And then our goal is to study them, learn from them, and then also we have built a very long-term rewilding plan. But the rewilding of any species, you have to take indigenous people groups, federal agencies, the public at large, right? Like there's some misconceptions about wolves out there in general, right? They kind of get a bad rap, but they're incredibly important for the ecosystem. And so they will live out their natural lives on this large ecological preserve. And then potentially future generations could be rewilded if that's what other people want. So we don't push the rewilding agenda. If that's something that is wanted. Like in the case of the direwolf, we had several different indigenous partners, and one of them being MHA Nation, which is 3 nations that came together. It's actually in their oral traditions and in their culture. They think that it may have been the gray wolf, the great wolf in their cultures. So they're they're excited about eventually could they have them on a secure ecological preserve back on their sovereign land. And so for us, we just want to collaborate in any way that people want to.
Okay, Ben, I'm gonna ask like super to your point of like you're comfortable asking really dumb questions. I'm gonna ask mine. Now that you're observing them, what's like the thing that you're observing that you could be most excited about? And what are you observing that you're worried about?
There was an inflection point that changed for me because right before launch, we in this world of like generative AI, we wanted people to see them, but we also didn't want there to be like a travel receipt to a certain location, right? And so we actually moved them to another location to let a couple of key people see them, like Time and Rolling Stone and New Yorker and a few others. So we felt like, hey, we got to let some people see them. So it's like, don't just take our word for it. Like you come see them, spend a day with us and whatnot. And right after they got back, like I was back where they were 2.5 weeks after that. And I was in the preserve, right? And some of my animal care teams were like, I don't know, 50, 100 yards away. And I was sitting in one of their play areas, and Remus came up like kind of close to me, and like I bottle fed Romulus and Remus, right? And so like I reached out and I pet Remus, barely touched Remus. Because Remus came to me, and then Remus like kind of took a few steps, and then kind of like started acting like a wolf, right? Like kind of like jumped away, like a little like I moved a little bit and it was a little skittish. And so there was a moment, like you can never forget that these animals are still wild animals, right? These are still wolves. These are not dogs. And so that was a moment for me where I was like, I'm never going to pet or touch or probably be this close to them again because they're now starting to behave more and more like wolves. Like when they're fluffy, polar bear looking puppies, they're like, you're kind of like, oh, this is like, I think it falsifies the relationship on some level. So I think I was pleasantly surprised that in our behavioral team is pleasantly surprised how fast they are adapting to be nearly wild wolves. Only one of our key caretakers, who's with them literally every day, at least 6 days a week. There's like she's the only one that has that level of a relationship still. And remember this was only a few months ago, right? Like a few months before, they were like falling in my lap, right? And so so that was the thing that our animal care team told me that we would if things were going healthily with their development, they would get to. But then there was that moment where I kind of experienced it firsthand. I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to be in the preserve again.
Yeah, you're
Like,
like wild wolves, like literally
yeah, so I was like,
wild.
this is a good. This has been great, and I love you guys, but I'm gonna respect you from my distance, right? And so, but that was something that I think that was both sides of your question.
When you think 5 to 10 years out with what you're doing, what's the end state? What's the end goal here? And obviously you've created an incredible AI infrastructure that can not only code extinct animals, then create this bridge to the most, similar living species. And then in it, I heard you say, synthetic wombs and all these incredible other things. Um, but so what's the business model? And like what's your hope and dream, Ben, for what you're building 5 to 10 years out?
So I'll talk about the hope and dream, and then we can talk business. But hope and dream, if we fast forward 10 years out, I hope that we have a handful of species that we have brought back with enough engineered genetic diversity that they can successfully thrive and live and thrive on their own back in their natural habitat or something very close to it, right? So that's data point one. The
Yep.
second thing that I think is equally important is I hope we're seeing mass adoption much quicker than we thought with our technologies to conservation. But I hope that a combination of those tools and technologies, including things like artificial wombs and biobanking, all come together so that this de-extinction toolkit that's super cool to bring back things like mammoths and thylacines, and hopefully even species like stellar sea cow and others that we can't yet because we don't have ways to gestate them. I hope that same application is being applied in real time for endangered species. And I don't. And once again, sometimes this is an unpopular opinion, but I still am convicted about it, regardless of whether it's popular or not. Like while 99.9% of the world should be focusing on existing or slightly innovative new ways for conservation, there is 1%, which I think should be us, that is developing some level of a fail-safe. And if we can get to the point which we can take samples, engineering genetic diversity, and then use artificial wombs to grow 100 northern white rhinos versus even having to use surrogates, right, from an animal welfare perspective, from a population growth perspective, if we could help use these tools to help productionize endangered species, well, then I think that we will get recovery of species much faster. And that's not to take away from the incredible work that current conservation has done for the last 100 years. It's just new tools to help augment the fight, right? Because it is currently a losing fight. So a world where a little kid can see videos or go to Northern America or Alaska or wherever and see mammoths thriving back in their population, and also see those technologies being applied to create a more biodiverse world in Africa with northern white rhinos, and those same technologies being applied to both. To me, that's kind of my, I think, goal in state, for sure.
Important question, just because I want to better understand it. How do you make money?
Right now, we don't. We're really good at losing it. And
I bet
We're
you could sell a lot of people wanting to see photos of these of the
Yeah,
game
yeah.
worn
I mean,
wool.
we get all kinds of stuff. Like I get they're like, we get everything to will you make me a dragon to can I buy direwolves? Can you make a pink direwolf for my kids? Like so we get all kinds of we get lots of weird requests. Um and so our bit I don't think we yet know every aspect of it, but we know kind of three parts of the business model. When we started out, it was just technology innovation, right? We've spun out two businesses that we've announced publicly. One, Form Bio, being a computational biology platform. The second one, Breaking, which is breaking.com. It's a plastic degradation company that's using a super accelerated microbe that we genetically engineered using our tools in computational biology to break the chemical bonds of plastic. So not making smaller plastics, but literally eviscerating plastic. And then and everything we've thrown at it, it works, which is pretty cool. And then we have a third one we haven't announced yet. We'll announce hopefully next year. So we'll continue to spin out technologies. And then there is a huge opportunity to work with governments to rewild these species, get government subsidies, get carbon credits, Eden bonds. There's a huge, like if you look at the carbon market and the biodiversity credits market, and what will probably end up being evolved into nature credits. And now you've got people like PwC certification. You've got people like, TPG just raised like an $8 billion fund around this thesis. You've got Lloyd's of London certifying it. So I think that you're seeing, kind of like you've seen in crypto, a maturation of trackability as it relates to improvement to land and improvement to carbon sequestration and methane suppression. So, if we are successful in our efforts and successful in rewilding them, I think there's a lot of long-term. The animals become long-term annuities, which is pretty interesting. And then the third is governments. Governments are coming to us, even though we open source our technology. Kind of like open source, a lot of times people will go to the open source providers and say, "Hey, we tried this. This is great, but we need you to solve this problem." And we're working with one government right now that wants to get to a certain number of species that are female for breedability for captive breeding programs to save the species. That's culturally important to them. And it's going to take them about 23 years. We can do it in 3.
Wow.
It's going to cost them a couple $100 million. We can do it for less than $100 million. So we can save them money and also save them decades, and also give them genetically engineered products that have additional genetic diversity engineered into them that we've taken from museums and other samples, right? So we've and even some synthetic genetic engineering as some genetic diversity. These are the types of business models that are starting to evolve that we think is pretty interesting.
Wow, there's many different ways where it sounds like you can make money from like the core DNA of the business, no pun intended. Um, I have to ask this because I'm dying to ask this because I also grew up obsessed with woolly mammoths, which is a whole other story. But you're targeting the woolly mammoth for de-extinction by 2028. Obviously, behind you is incredible numbers of really cool woolly mammoth elements. Wow, what goes into that, and how do we make that happen?
So we're in the editing phase, right? So in Chippendale, our woolly mice were some people mischaracterized it and said, "Oh, well, this is a good first step." It's really a validation step, right? Because like we didn't just start the mammoth. So we've done we've gotten a lot of the ancient DNA through partners like Lou Vidal and others. We've done a lot. We Colossal had to go build the reference genome for the African elephant, the Borneo elephant, the Asian elephant. Like none of those existed, so we had to go build those reference genomes and open source those for the world. And then we've done the comparative genomics, and there's about 85 genes and probably multiple edits in a couple of the genes. So don't know the exact edit count yet, and that we're editing. And so we're in the editing phase. We created stem cells from elephants, which was insanely hard. And now we're in the editing phase, and we've made edits to about 25 of the 85 targeted genes. And then we tested some of the cold tolerant phenotypes like fat metabolism, and then coat color and woolly, the texture and how it grows in a mouse model, because it's 20 days of gestation versus 22 months to verify if we're on the right track. What's incredible about that project is we did it in 1 month. And then 1 month later, we had woolly mice, which was amazing. So it shows that the system works really, really quickly.
And
Which is
super dumb question: did you literally invent a new species with the woolly mice?
No, so this goes, so that you ask the biggest critic question, right? And there's two. There's why don't you just focus on conservation? But that's an education thing. That we have a $50 million foundation that we just donate to people working on conservation, and then we open source all of our technologies for conservation. So I think of this as like a free research and development thing for conservation. The second one kind of goes to your woolly mouse question. It's that there's about 30 different ways to classify a species. Speciation is a human construct. It's not something that nature invented, right? And so you put a fork in a river forks, and it separates these two toads over some period of time. If there's different environmental pressures or different predation, different survival of the fittest, you're going to have two different species, right? And so some people will classify polar bears as the same species, even though a child will be like, well, that's a white Arctic adapted bear, and this is a brown bear that's not aquatic adapted. Yet they can interbreed and produce viable offsprings, and they do it all day long. And so there are species definitions where if a species can interbreed, it should be the same species. But a child will tell you that a brown bear and a polar bear are not the same thing. And by the way, they are classified as two different species. I don't think the woolly mouse. The way I think about it is, I don't think the woolly mouse is a new species. Some people think it is, and some people think it's not, right? And so there's just this human construct of how we label. We like to compartmentalize things and put things in boxes because that's how we as this current evolution of hominids look at things and put things in box, and so that's how we think about them. But what's interesting on the direwolf stuff is that no one, we had indigenous people groups, we had private landowners, we had the government, which causes I thought it was a good thing to tell our government, regardless of what party they're in, what we were doing. I thought that's a good, responsible thing for me to do as the CEO. We got negative feedback on that, but the biggest feedback that we got was, about 20% of the paleo community and the evolutionary biology community wanted to argue classification. But if you look at the phylogenetic tree of life, 99.9% of all of life is based on where it lived, when it lived, and its morphological state. Like, we don't have DNA for all of that. And so based on the morphological definition of species and the fact that we use the DNA from the U.S., we use a donor wolf from the U.S., so it kind of lives here. It met numerous of those of the species definition, but that's been the biggest. It's surprising to me, but that's been the biggest debate. Every day we get this. I don't know why that's the debate, when every single day we get like parents sending in and teachers sending in stuff like this. And like, I got this a couple weeks ago where like people like draw us, they made this for us, and they like write multi-page letters to us. And it's like, okay, we're doing something right because we're helping species, we're building cool technologies that can help human healthcare, and then we're also inspiring kids. And I don't know how helpful to conservation, inspiring kids, or to developing technologies for human healthcare. I don't know how arguing what to call something, whether a woolly mouse is a new species or a direwolf is a direwolf, or a transgenic wolf. Like, I don't know how that helps any of those causes. So but those are the biggest
No,
that is.
this was beautiful because we actually, first of all, those were also some really great pictures that get sent your way every day. That's pretty cool. You're creating the platform to help prepare us for extinction, and as we all know, like, we all live on one planet, and
Yeah.
every species is why the other species can evolve and live and thrive. And uh no, I mean, you're pre-preparing us to be able to stay alive.
We feel
It's
very convicted, and I think that's something that entrepreneurs have to do. Is like, everyone's like, oh, what's that old saying? It's like, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life.
Yep.
We feel beyond that. We feel very convicted about our mission. There's people out there like Elon that are saying, we also have to make Earth make life multi-planetary and take human consciousness, which I also agree with. And so I think that you have to be very convicted about it, right? And so, like, what some people don't realize is, like, when we're doing something that's big and is bold, and sometimes that's scary. And there was a time when the auto manufacturers debated whether putting seat belts in cars because they thought it was too scary. But we all know that seatbelts save lives, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
I just believe I'm very convicted on our mission, and the best case scenario is everything works out and we develop renewable energies, and we've got limitless energy and we've got limitless clean water, and we find a way to live it with nature better, and we don't need any of this technology. Cool. We at least someone was working on an insurance plan.
Thank you for working on the insurance plan for all of us. Ben, I want to end on one question because I truly could sit here and talk to you for 4 more hours. In fact, that's all I want to do. And I'm jealous that Joe Rogan got so many hours with you. I want to end on one thing, which is you are to your bones ambitious. And actually, what's amazing getting to know you is it's effortless for you. It's very clear to me that the way you think is effortless. If you were going to just inspire people out there, entrepreneurs everywhere, to be a little bit more ambitious for the sake of our future, how would you put that in words?
I think you just have to not. You have to be convicted about what you're doing, and really believe you're doing something right. And if you're getting negative feedback, you just have to not listen. Like, the best advice I ever got was not to listen to any advice.
And to get fired for not wearing your uniform.
Yeah. Well, Accenture was because they didn't like me, but the movie studio, yeah. I mean, they had just ridiculous suspenders, and I was like, why do you need suspenders in the first place? And why, if you have them, why do they have to be so ridiculous?
No, but all jokes aside, you're absolutely right. You've got to be able to put on blinders and chart your own path. And you've got to be
Yeah.
comfortable you're not always going to be liked and you're not always going to be understood.
I mean, I sleep great. I have an 8 sleep bed. I sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, and I don't think 1 minute about it.
I love that. Ben, again, thank you so much for your time today. I wish I had so much more of your time and energy. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm absolutely, in awe of this swing with Colossal. It's really, really impressive. And you'll be getting a woolly mammoth drawing from me shortly.
Good,
So
good.
I request that it gets framed and literally put behind you. But no, just Ben, thank you so much for all that you're doing. I am so inspired, and yeah, your ambition is palpable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back with another episode of Inspired with Alexa Von Tobel soon. Thank you.